Welcome back to Tocqueville Talks. I'm Brent Nelson, director of the Tocqueville Center at Furman University, and I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Beth L'Arrivée. Little bit colder today, isn't it?
Yeah, we went from 80 degrees to the 20s. Not too much of a shift.
I guess that's more like South Carolina than it is like Canada in the winter, but it is a bit abrupt here.
Yeah, but what is it? In South Carolina, you get all four seasons every day, pretty much, through the winter. This is not all four seasons over the course of a week, though, because it's not warming up today.
Yeah. Well, it is still February, so we're still in the midst of the winter. But today we're bringing you a conversation that Beth had with Peter Feaver of Duke University. Now, he's a leading scholar in civilian-military relations. He's a professor at Duke, of course, and he's also he directs the program in American Grand Strategy there, and he's a co-principal investigator of the America in the World Consortium. He's a Harvard PhD, and he's also worked in the White House on a number of occasions. Most importantly, he was the director for defense policy and arms control on the National Security Council at the White House in the early 90s. So he's one of these scholars who goes back and forth between his academic career and his policymaking role. And he's also a public intellectual. He publishes in Foreign Affairs quite frequently. So it was really great to have him with us. His work centers on a question most Americans never think about until it fails: how a free society keeps its military powerful, professional, and firmly under civilian control. Beth, you began asking him how his own path led him to that question.
Yeah, we started with the mentors and experiences that shaped him. He grew up in a family of professors, serving in the Navy Reserves and moving between academy and national security policymaking, as you mentioned. From there, we explored the American tradition of civilian control, the pressures polarization places on it today, and the risks of pulling the military into partisan conflict. We also talk about citizenship and service and why the all-volunteer force matters, and how veterans strengthen civic life, and why the presence of ROTCs on campuses and service members on these college campuses can change how students think about war, as well as responsibility and the common good.
Healthy civilian-military relations are like oxygen. When they're working, you don't notice. When they're not, nothing else matters. So here's our conversation with Peter Feaver.
Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
And my first question is a bit of involving your personal background a little bit, from your time serving in government roles, like on the National Security Council, and then also teaching at Duke. What personal experiences have most shaped your understanding of what makes civil-military relations healthy?
Well, maybe I should begin by saying that I'm in the family business. My dad was a professor, and I grew up wanting to be a professor. In fact, when I was in elementary school, I remember writing what I want to be when I grow up. I said, I want to be a classics professor like my dad at Lehigh University.
Wow,
that's
amazing.
But if I'm not good enough to be a classics professor at Lehigh, I'll be a classics professor at Oxford, which were the only two universities I knew about. But along the way, I got captured by international relations and American foreign policy. Actually, my dad's good friend, who was a professor at Lehigh, Carrie Joint, that was his area, a specialty. And so when I went to Lehigh as a faculty brat, of course, I became mentored by Carrie Joint. Okay. And he encouraged me to pursue a graduate career. And so I went to Harvard for my PhD. And there I was mentored by Joe Nye. And if you've ever met Joe Nye, he passed this past year in 2025. But he just was this incredibly charismatic and impressive guy. And so as a young graduate student, I said, I want to be Joe Nye. Because he would breeze into your meeting fresh from the plane where he had been in D.C. advising policymakers, and he blended the policy world and the scholarly world really well. And so I told him, boy, I'd love to have a career like yours. And he said, well, if you want to do that, the toughest union card to get is tenure. So you have to prioritize being a professor and then add the policy.
Okay.
And so that's basically what I have done. I followed his advice. I got a job at Duke, was on the tenure track, got tenure. But fortunately, I was able to also have some policy engagement along the way. I won a Council on Foreign Relations Fellowship in 93, 94 to serve, which I took in the Clinton White House. And then when George W. Bush was elected, I helped in the campaign in 2000, and then I flunked my job interview in 2000, so I didn't get into the administration in the first term, but then helped again in 2004, did better in the job interview that time, and that's when I ended up at the White House.
Nice. Well, that's fascinating. I don't think I've ever heard of a professor who dreamed since childhood of becoming a professor. That might be a first.
Yeah.
I didn't even know somebody could do something like that, really. I was so ignorant. I had a family full of school teachers and music teachers, but nobody really doing like higher level PhD professor type work. So when I got to the end of my undergraduate degree, I had a professor who I was reading actually Catherine Zuckert's book on postmodern Plato as I was studying Heidegger, doing my senior thesis on Heidegger. And he just happened to mention sort of casually, she's at Notre Dame. You might be interested in doing graduate school. And I was like, graduate school? What? This was not something about my Canadian public school education had kind of put within the sphere of possibilities for me. But I was hooked once it was, because, once I realized that you could do this beyond undergraduate, I was like, well, that's the option for me.
Well, I've been blessed with really great mentors at every stage. Beginning, of course, with my dad and mom. My dad's the smartest man I knew and just impressive. But then as I went through adolescence, and naturally breaking with parents and wanting to have other mentors, I had great mentors. I'm a youth pastor who was really influential, then in college, of course. But others, friends of the family who encouraged me to join the Navy, that turned out to be a pivotal decision. I joined the Navy Reserves. I had another friend in graduate school who showed me how to do it. He was my sea daddy and got me into the Navy Reserves. And that was a door opener in many ways. And, of course, getting back to your original question, that was a great way to study civil-military relations because a reservist is at once a civilian and a military officer.
It's exactly at the nexus.
Yeah, and so, but along the way, I just had really wonderful people giving me good advice, and often I would take it, and that worked out well. Yeah.
Well, speaking of the civil-military relations, to get into your work a little bit, what key factors do you see, like from recruiting patterns or leadership culture, societal expectations, that have helped preserve that neutrality in the past? And where do you see the most intense pressures on that right now?
Well, actually, Joe and I used to use this analogy with a different topic, but I think it works perfectly for civil-military relations. Good civil-military relations is like oxygen in the air. You don't notice you have it until you don't have it. And then it's the only thing you can think about when it's lacking. And we are blessed with a long record of civilian control of the military in the United States, an enviable record that goes all the way back to the founding. And we can credit George Washington, who was very wise in wielding the power, and in particular in self-restraint. He had the capacity to be a king. He could have, and several times, turned the military into a threat against an incompetent Congress, and he didn't. And that's set both a standard and a norm, but also set up institutions that have helped keep civilian control of the military ever since. Of course, we have lots of friction, lots of periods where things aren't going well, and nerds in the business like me, that's what we focus on. We're constantly focusing on the negative. But it is worth stepping back and saying we're blessed, this country is blessed to have a capable military that is also voluntarily subordinate to civilian control. That said, there's a lot of stressors, and this time now, 2026, a ton of stressors on the military. Most of the stressors come from the civilian side of the house, though, not the military. So in some countries, you have to worry about a military that's getting too big for its britches or wants to seize control. In the United States, it's usually civilians who are misbehaving, who are dragging the military into partisan fights that they have no business being in. And so a lot of my prescriptive advice is helping the military to navigate how to stay on the straight and narrow while civilians are maybe misbehaving.
Yeah, and what do you see the main risks of those misbehaviors as being? And could you give some examples?
Yeah, and let's be clear, this is misbehavior by both Democrats and Republicans. No party has a monopoly on misbehavior. And it's worth identifying what drives them to it is the popularity that the U.S. military enjoys. So it's the institution that the public has the highest degree of confidence, the federal institution, in which the public has the highest degree of confidence. Much higher confidence in the military than in Congress, the presidency, Supreme Court, higher education, where you and I are in. We are much lower than the military. So if you have a project that you care about, you, a political leader, have a project you care about, if you can wrap it in a military uniform, or if you can promote the project while the military is wallpaper behind you in the visual, it helps. It helps you. It doesn't help the military. That's my point. And so people want to enlist the military in their partisan projects. It's also the case that the military as an institution is capable, very well resourced, and tends to follow orders. So if you have a project that you want to do, like a civil rights project, then identifying civil rights goals and working them out through the military can be faster than in civilian society. So 75, 80 years ago, President Truman integrated the military, before that, the African American units had been segregated, led by white officers by and large, but otherwise 100% African American. And it was recognized that that's just not viable, and it actually was undermining American military might. An integrated military was needed. But he ordered that at the same time that there's a Jim Crow South, and the South had not yet gone through the civil rights movement, and so many military bases were integrated on the base. And as soon as the soldiers left the fence and walked out into civilian society, it was not integrated. So the military could be a vanguard ahead of the civil rights movement, and that reproduces with women, so women in combat, and every civil rights movement since, gays and lesbians. Even now today, the fight is over transgender. In each case, the military as an institution is able to implement and force changes on its institutions at the direction of civilian political leaders, mind you, faster than civilian society can change. And when that gap gets too large, then you have problems. Meaning the gap between where the political leaders are telling the military to go and where the rest of civilian society is, if that gap is too wide, then you have problems. And so there was the integration of African Americans in the military was a rough prospect. It took decades to accomplish. But Colin Powell, in one way, sort of symbolized that, okay, the military had achieved that, and that was a great accomplishment. But as you might remember from the 1990s, when President Clinton wanted to allow open gays and lesbians to serve in the military, in the 90s, civilian society was not yet ready to accept that. And so he was moving faster than civilian society, and that created a big civil-military crisis for the administration. Congress pushed back, and the Clinton administration had to retreat from what they were trying to do. 20 years later, Obama was able to do the same policies without any fuss because civilian society had moved along. So this is the challenge for the military as they operate in a polarized civilian society. It's much, much harder.
That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way, that the military could be, because it's a well-oiled machine. It has a, top to bottom hierarchical structure, extremely different from the, bottom-up democratic popular sovereignty structure, that it could be employed in that way. Do you think that did the attempt in the 90s, even though it was unsuccessful with, integrating gays into the military under Clinton, did that itself nonetheless still change the civilian? Did that have an effect that then, is there kind of a causal feedback that ends up happening where it was influential on popular culture, and then they could come in through the military again?
Yes, I do. I do think that the causal arrow runs in both directions. So a powerful argument for, say, African American civil rights was they paid in blood to help defend America in World War II. So they are every bit as much a citizen as you or I. Why should we deny them civil rights? And it also gave many black leaders the confidence that they were equal to white America. And so civil rights leaders, some of them sort of were forged in World War II and the experience of the military that then they translated into effective political action for civil rights. So yes, it can go both directions. And
that's interesting too that you bring up that there was a question of this, whether or not Black Americans were fully citizens that had been going on since the beginning, and that kind of answered the question, their participation in World War II, as you were mentioning, and questions of citizenship are very fraught, increasingly so.
Right.
What it even means to be a citizen. Right. Is that potentially like an avenue that you see for helping America maybe regain a sense of what it is to be a citizen today? Is this maybe a positive way that the military could be?
Yes. And some people have urged that we should go back to a day of drafts, which forces people to serve in the military because it has these salutary citizenship effects. I'm not in favor of the draft limited to the military because it's actually a very inefficient way to get the military capability we need. When we had a draft military, it wasn't able to fight at the level of proficiency that we now have come to expect from the U.S. military. So I'm a big fan of the all-volunteer force. But there's no question that those who have gone through and served in the military come out with a different sense of citizenship and duty. They want to keep serving the country after they have their military service ends. They are leaders in their communities, and so they are a great resource. Veterans are a great resource. They've also been taken out of whatever silos that they might have had, regional or other silos, socioeconomic silos, that is helpful for them to see America as bigger than just whatever was their home community. So all of that is good. I think you can achieve some of those goals maybe through national service, which would be broader than military service. Military service is one component. Indeed, I think this is a way that the military as an institution can give back right now, when the gap between public confidence in the military and public confidence in the rest of civilian society is so wide. The military can help us by reminding everyone, there's lots of ways you can serve, and military is just one of them. Military is a great way to serve, but it's only just one. And so I encourage my military friends, when folks come up to them and thank them for their service, often in an airport or something, someone will say, thanks for your service. I encourage my military friends to ask, well, what do you do? And they say, well, I'm an 8th grade math teacher. Wow, thanks for your service. That is a hard job. There's just so many ways you can give to the public, and the military can remind us of that.
Well, that actually brings me to the last thing I wanted to ask you about is given that gap between the civilian and the military in terms of the influence that it has and declining volunteer numbers of people that are experiencing the military directly. What about within the realm of higher education specifically? How can that potentially be utilized, or what do you see its role as being in terms of cultivating that idea of service to country or defining what citizenship is in a constitutional republic?
Well, I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, but this is what I'm going to answer, which is I'm a strong advocate for keeping the military on college campuses and as diverse a set of college campuses as possible. You could probably get all the ROTC billets you need from Texas A&M and a couple big schools in the SEC, but that would be bad for the country.
Okay.
I want the economically inefficient ROTC units on elite campuses, Harvard, Duke, Stanford, wherever, because they are reaching into corners of the civilian society that the Texas A&Ms and the Alabamas and what have you are not reaching. And yes, you might be bringing in slightly different officers into the military. Actually, the research shows they're not all that different. What you are bringing in is officers who have different friend groups, different roommates, different networks, and that, I think, is the real value. And so in the 90s, I and others were part of the group advocating to bring ROTC back onto Harvard and other Ivy campuses that had been kicked off because of the Vietnam War or opposition to Reagan's defense buildup or what have you. So sort of a leftist push to keep the military off of elite campuses. And I said, that's wrong. And if you take the taxpayers' dollar for research funding, by golly, you should have ROTC on your campus. You should at least allow ROTC to be on the campus. So it's important. Right now, the push is coming, ironically, from the right, pushing people, military, off of elite campuses on the grounds that these institutions are woke, quote-unquote woke, and we don't want to, infect the military officer with woke teaching. And my argument is you don't need to worry about that so much. Being exposed to these ideas is not going to corrupt the military officers. But it just might change the civilian students they're sitting next to in class. So I have lots of active military in my classes. They have a profound effect on my civilian students who are sitting next to them, who now they're studying American foreign policy and, say, debating, well, should there be a military strike in Iran, say a topic that's hot literally this minute. It's different when you have a person in mind that might be affected, who might have to go downrange and carry out that military strike. That classroom debate is different once you can put flesh onto the policy. And that's possible when the military are intersecting with civilians at all sectors of higher education. So I think that's a very valuable approach that is distinctively American. We do that better here than any other country in the world, and I hope we don't lose it.
Well, I have one example. It might sound trite, but I taught at Clemson for a bit, and when I was there, they have these very short but very steep hills that the campus is sort of designed. And I heard I'm not going to guarantee that this is true, but I heard it was designed that way.
It should be true, even if it's not true, yes.
I heard it was designed that way specifically for the military to keep fit, but also to extend that to the whole campus, that idea of physical fitness and that we're going to use our bodies. And I would show up at 6 a.m. I'd drive in the dark, and I would see them out there, the ROTC, and doing our calisthenics that started at some ungodly hour or whatever it was. And it was so inspiring. And even at that level, I think that reminder that this higher life of the mind it depends, and I think this goes back all the way to Socrates and his second sailing and his recognition that to do philosophy and to pursue questions of what is good and what is right and what is the best life, that you're doing that from a position of being inside of a body. You're not just a detached mind. You have a body and you are within a political community, and the continued existence of your body and therefore the life of the mind depends on being able to exist at that fundamental level. And so I think even just that reminder in a physical, like seeing people do calisthenics, seeing people get up early, do uncomfortable things in the cold, in all weather, in the heat. I think it's really important for students today to see that.
Well, and the causal arrow goes in both ways because sadly, war is part of the human condition, and some of the greatest literature in history comes from great people wrestling with that, to go back to Homer's.
Yes, exactly. The Iliad.
Odyssey.
I've taught the Iliad so many times, and I teach it specifically with that emphasis. There's a classicist, actually, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, but I have my students watch his lecture on it because he's a classicist, but he also studies like 20th century military. And Thomas Polema, I remembered it.
Okay.
And I had my students watch the lecture because he connects it to literature from World War II soldiers, World War I soldiers, Vietnam soldiers, all this like firsthand account of what it is just to be at war and what it does to you physically, but also what it does to the soul. And there's nothing like it. There's no approximation of that. It gets to such a fundamental level of what it means to be human and to relate to others as human beings. And to have that, the moment of Achilles and Priam, these mortal enemies, they're just reduced by 9 years of war and all the loss that's entailed. Achilles has lost his best friend Patroclus, and Priam has lost his sons, and he's losing his city. And they're able to meet and see each other as human beings.
And it's not just in war, but it's also returning from war. So Odyssey and some of the great literature of individuals wrestling with how they've changed from how war changed them, and now how do they return to civilian society. And, of course, this is precisely where the U.S. military is today. After the years of waging the global war on terror, they are now returning to American society and reintegrating, and they went to war, but America as a public did not fully go to war. How do they reintegrate? These are important issues that we have to wrestle with together as a society, and it's so much better when we can do it, each of us, side by side with each other, standing in each other's shoes and hearing each other's stories.
Yeah, and so we have all these ways that you've pointed out. You can have the military present on campuses. You can have other ways to serve. You can actually join the military, whether that's through being on the reserves or otherwise. And but we can also read about it. There's all this great literature, and that's definitely something that we should be doing at institutions of higher education, is reading this war literature, reading the Iliad, reading the Odyssey, reading firsthand accounts of soldiers. There's so much great literature out there. So,
indeed.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Tocqueville Talks. This episode was produced by Audrey Enghauser. Lucy Southwell provided administrative support. The theme music is called The Girl I Left Behind Me, a popular folk song in early 19th century America, here performed by Jacob Taylor Armerding. To learn more about our lecture series and events, our Tocqueville and Beaumont Fellows programs for undergraduates, and to listen to episodes, watch event recordings, or support our work, search on Google for the Tocqueville Center at Furman University. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, subscribe, comment, and share Tocqueville Talks on all your favorite listening services. And visit our YouTube channel for full recordings of past events and episodes. Until next time, goodbye.